So like that video was saying, it's like there's a G protein, which isn't really all too important, but basically it's a signal transduction pathway in the cell, which helps to amplify the signal, and like, I don't know, it's just some inner cell mechanism. But basically, the calcium ions in the synapse build up, and they signal that cell to make endocannabinoids and inhibit further signaling, which can have all these different effects. Yeah, David?
So is the basics of how it works, the protein actively transports ions across the membrane, and then the concentration of ions on the other side prevents signaling from continuing?
Kind of. So when you have the glutamate, the neurotransmitter, right? That the first cell releases, and then that binds to the second cell, and then these ion channels open, and they release calcium into the synapse. And when there's all this, what? Yes, space in between. And when all this calcium's in there, it signals the cell to make endocannabinoids. And when the endocannabinoids bind to this first cell, that blocks them from sending further neurotransmitters across the synapse.
And then the calcium goes back in.
Yeah, then the calcium goes back in. So it has a pretty interesting evolutionary history. It's not sure really when it first started, but it's present in this group is Deuterostomia. And basically it's present in all vertebrates, which include like mammals, birds. Most of the things you think about as animals besides like insects, it's in there. And it's also in echinoderms, which are things like starfish and sea squirts. I'm not really sure why it's those two groups specifically, but I guess at just some point in the evolutionary history of animals, the endocannabinoid system was just made and it's just created. And so the endocannabinoid system it helps you eat a lot, but this could be a problem because it sort of seems like it's sort of designed for us to all eat ourselves and gorge ourselves on fats all the time. But it's a homeostatic system, which basically means that it's based on creating this internal balance. And that's important because without it being a balance, we would just keep eating and eating and eating until we die. And that's not a good thing. So the counterbalance to endocannabinoids is that hormone leptin that I was talking about that's produced primarily by fat cells and the digestive tract. And that basically causes you to get food through you faster, not absorb as much nutrients, and pretty much just prevent yourself from eating too much. So at the beginning of class, I fed Jake and Nathan a Big Mac. I think they've both eaten it by now. So that was really a show that while Jake still ate the Big Mac, he didn't enjoy it as much, and I don't think he ate it as quickly as Nathan did. And that just shows that the fact that he wasn't hungry really discouraged him from eating too much, even though it's still a good thing for our bodies, in our body's mind, because fats are usually pretty rare. It still seemed like a good thing, and it still was appetizing to him, but it wasn't nearly as much so because he wasn't as hungry, and there's this other hormone called cholecystokinin, it's abbreviated CCK, which does the opposite of endocannabinoids. It makes you less hungry, it makes food taste less good, and it makes you not want to eat. So endocannabinoids were first discovered from actually researchers trying to discover what makes THC affect humans and other animals the way it does. And in that way, the CB1 receptor was discovered in the brain, and they were trying to figure out what exactly these receptors did. And they found that a lot of the receptors were in the frontal lobe, the hippocampus, and the cerebellum, but they didn't really know what they did, so they tried researching and experimenting a long time before they finally discovered these natural chemicals, these endocannabinoids that humans made on their own without THC. And so they at first thought that endocannabinoid receptors were just kind of there and THC just stimulated it. And at first some researchers actually thought that it existed solely to get high off THC, but then researchers later realized that it's actually part of this natural homeostatic system, and it just happens that THC affects the same receptor, sort of like it just happens to have the same shape. Yeah?
So, two questions. First of all, it's just a random coincidence that the molecule in this plant matches the receptor in our brain. And then, so the leptin and you said the CCK, they counter the endocannabinoid receptors function of making you want to eat more, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like, like what fake sugar is?
Yeah.
I forget what it's called. But it's like in diet soda. It's like the same shape as sugar, so it tastes the same as it, even though And so there's a lot of individual differences that the endocannabinoid system could account for. It's present in all vertebrates and a few invertebrate animals, and the abundance and sensitivity of CB1 and CB2 receptors in the brain could cause a variety of different things, like why some people are more prone to have anxiety and depression issues, or why some soldiers are more likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder because they can't forget the things that they saw and the things that they've done as soldiers in the field. And it could account for a lot of different individual differences and other things like insomnia and things where people just eat way too much. It could be because of an overactivity in endocannabinoid receptors in their gut and their digestive tracts. And I think the most important message to take away from this is not only the functions of this basic system in our bodies, but also the possible applications of utilizing this system to, for instance, help people who have trouble with anxiety or depression or insomnia, or soldiers with PTSD, to help them get over the things that they've done and help them forget about these things which are really hurting them. And it could also be used to help protect neurons from things like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's, because it helps, I don't know, like I said, I don't really know how it helps, but it helps to prevent these nerves from degenerating and falling apart, sort of. So I think this area of research is an incredible thing to study, and it has all kinds of possible medical applications. And I don't know, I think the endocannabinoid system is just really cool, and I think there's a lot of potential in the future for it to be utilized. Thank you. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer. Yeah.
What do you think would be a possible use of the endocannabinoid system?
I think, like I said, things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's could definitely be possibly prevented due to certain endocannabinoids signals
So like
stimulating.
Yeah, stimulating.
And then also, I think especially things like PTSD and people who experience traumatic events that it really causes them a lot of problems later in life. That could definitely be helpful because it could help them forget about things like that, and possibly even autism. It could help them forget things that their brain doesn't really need. Yeah.
So if it helps you eat, would it be possible or a possible direction to use this for cancer patients or taking chemo or other
Yeah,
things like that?
it probably could be, because it also, in addition to helping you eat, it also helps you actually absorb more nutrients, because it does something with your intestine. It slows the passage of food, which gives your intestines more time to absorb nutrients from it. So yeah, it definitely could.
Do you know if there are other drugs and medicines being worked on that stimulate endocannabinoid receptors in different ways from THC that could maybe have benefits and lack some of the consequences of that molecule?
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's some drugs that are being looked into. I'm not sure what stages they're at or what they're called, but I know that some researchers are actually definitely putting a lot of effort into developing some of those drugs.
But so far THC is the only molecule that people know that.
Pretty much. There's other cannabinoids which can also stimulate some receptors in some animals, but for the most part, yeah, THC is the main one outside of endogenous ones that people create themselves in their own bodies. All right, so if anyone doesn't have any more questions, I'd like to hear from you guys, the stuff you wrote down, mostly on the last one, ideas that you thought of, stuff like that. Anyone want to say something? How about someone who hasn't said anything? Mostly that area, this area. Pretty much everyone except for these three people. Okay, well, awesome. What did you write?
What did I write? I'm still writing.
Someone who's not still writing. Okay, I guess you can start.
Well, I already brought up the cancer patients, but I also thought that it could be used in possibly in sleep medications.